5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. Has it been live? Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, welcome to our very smart and sophisticated audience on a very sad day for the nation. The Senate just passed the utterly misnamed One Big Beautiful Bill. You know, I'm up to here with the mainstream media.
Really?
They are so complicit with Trump. Why do they keep calling it that?
Because that's the name of the bill.
That's the name of the bill that Trump forced on them. And the one good thing the Senate did, apparently, is eliminated that name.
Oh, did they?
Yes, and there's no reason for the media to constantly repeat that name. You know, there are so many better names for it. Inhumane monstrosity, Donald Trump's folly. This is a bill that at every level is a disaster for the country. Yeah, they throw in a little bit of chump change for the middle class, you know, a bit of savings on Social Security, a little bit of increase on what you can deduct, no tax on tips. That's a minor, minuscule part of this bill. Where is the enormous hole in the budget coming from? Is it coming from the middle class and the poor? Of course not. It's coming from, as always, the very wealthy, the very rich, the big income earners. That's where the vast majority of the tax cuts are coming. But they don't want you to believe this, right? Trump says, don't believe what you see and hear. Don't believe when the Congressional Budget Office tells you this is going to blow a $3.3 trillion, not billion-dollar hole in the deficit. It's not going to blow a hole in the deficit at all, the Republicans tell us. Do you know why they're saying that, Sam?
No idea.
It's a total fabrication. They're saying you can't count the deficit increasing effects, the huge hole in the deficit that the tax cuts are going to produce because they were adopted in the first Trump term. Even though they would expire, even without this bill, you can't count them. Even though it's real, it's actually going to put a $3.3 trillion at least in the deficit. They want you not to believe what you see, not to believe what you hear, but only believe what they can fabricate. We have reached the level here. And you know I'm not prone to hyperbole. We are coming close to George Orwell's double think, right? Where war is peace, hate is love, famine is plenty, deficit increases are actually decreases. It's insane, and I don't think the American people are falling for it. You know, there's this old saying, you can fool some of the people all the time, you can fool all the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Put up this poll, Sam.
Yes, sir. Right away, sir.
This is astonishing.
Astonishing.
We have never seen anything like this.
Never?
Never, for such a major, highly publicized, highly pumped initiative by a president of the United States and his party. And this is consistent with other polls that have been taken very recently. This shows a, 26-point deficit in support. Other polls have shown as high as a 29-point deficit. We're talking 2-1, right?
Yeah.
The American people rejecting this. And the only reason it's even this high is support from the MAGA crowd. If you look at Democrats and independents, or even just independents, the critical swing people, it is even worse. Now, why is this so bad? You know, there's an old saying, let me count the ways. I can't get into every single point, but we've already noted at least a $3.3 trillion hole in the deficit over the next decade. But as economists have pointed out, it's actually much, much worse than that. Do you know why, Sam?
Tell me.
Because it includes an enormous structural hole in the deficit. In other words, what's going to happen when you increase the deficit by trillions of dollars? It's got to be financed, right?
I don't know.
Yes, and how is it financed?
I don't know.
By Treasury bills. And this poses a real issue of whether Treasury bills can hold their value, whether we are risking default. And a lot of these bills are held by foreigners and foreign adversaries, which puts us at an enormous risk. And it also will increase the non-useful, non-substantive part of the federal budget, which is debt service, which is becoming the largest component of the federal budget. And if you increase the debt servicing, that means you have less money for programs that actually help the American people. But on top of the huge deficit, that structural deficit, that's going to be much worse than just $3.3 trillion, they've actually have budget increases in this bill that's supposed to be saving us money. And you know where the budget increases mostly are going?
Just tell me.
You can only imagine. To Trump's border wall, which is another policy the American people have totally rejected, and his deportation efforts. We're talking $150 billion being devoted to a program that doesn't help anyone in America. It only hurts us because these undocumented immigrants, and almost all of them are not criminals, contrary to what Trump told you. I gave the statistics in the last show. 72% with 0 criminal convictions, and the vast majority of the others with minor traffic violations or the like. So he's giving all this money to something that's only going to hurt us because, you know, these workers are the mainstay of their agricultural industry, the construction industry, the hospitality, the personal service. And for one brief, shining moment of glory, Trump understood this, right, Sam? And he said, oh, I'm not going to, deport people from all these businesses. That lasted, a day or two? And now he's back deporting people who are supporting our economy, paying taxes, and in so doing, blowing even a bigger hole in our deficit. And, and the Republican Party has for decades claimed to be the party of fiscal responsibility, that are totally devoted to balanced budgets and reducing the deficit. Here's the 2016 Republican platform, the platform that guess who ran on, Sam?
Tell me.
Donald Trump.
You're asking me way too many questions.
All right. The Republican path to fiscal sanity begins with a constitutional requirement for a federal balanced budget. We will fight for a balanced budget, and we will fight to prevent deficits from mounting to become maybe a government default. This is the official platform of the Republican Party. The Heritage Foundation, the leading conservative think tank, has said as one of the core principles of conservatism is that the federal deficit and debt must not place financial burdens on future generations. Tax policies should raise the revenue necessary to fund appropriate functions of government. But let's not stop here. When Donald Trump campaigned for the first time, what did he say? We owe $19 trillion as a country, and we're going to knock it down, and we're going to bring it down big league. We're going to bring it down quickly. We're going to stop our deficits. We're going to stop our deficits, and we're going to do it very quickly. they understand the pernicious effects on deficits. They claim that controlling deficits is one of the reasons you should support conservatives and Republicans. Unlike those profligate spending Democrats, that's one of our core principles. But when it comes to supporting their rich donors and their rich friends, which are the overwhelming beneficiaries of this inhumane monstrosity bill, then the principles just go out the window. You know, you've heard me say this so many times. You can explain American politics in one sentence. Democrats have no spine, Republicans have no principles, and they've absolutely proven it beyond not just any doubt, any reasonable doubt, that they have no principles when it comes to supporting their rich friends and their rich donors. Their own professed core commitment to cutting deficits and balancing budgets go right out the window or right into the shredder. Now, the other horrific part of this is, again, according to independent estimates, that anywhere from 12 million to 15 million needy Americans, not the rich, of course, that's not who's on Medicaid, will lose their Medicaid coverage or not be able to obtain their Medicaid coverage. And, you know, this is how they operate. You know, they operate by obfuscation, obstruction, delay, defection. They don't tell you openly what they're doing. And they say, oh, we're not cutting Medicaid. We're just cutting waste and fraud. Of course, they didn't identify the waste and fraud that this bill cuts. But we're just making sure that able-bodied people should not get Medicaid unless they work. We've got to make them work, and we've got to tighten up and make much more stringent the eligibility requirements. If you want to see the hypocrisy of this, I saw it just this afternoon. This very able-bodied, very articulate Republican congressman gets on, Sam, and what does he say? No able-bodied person should have their health care insurance funded by the taxpayers. I'm not going to ask you this because I know you know it. This guy and every other able-bodied member of Congress gets an insurance policy vastly better than what you get on Medicaid, which is very minimal, and we all know who pays for it. The taxpayers. So the poor persons who really depend upon this, you know, they shouldn't get insurance paid for by the government. But all of us folks in the Congress, all of us, you know, a lot of them are millionaires, some are billionaires. We got to have insurance paid for by the taxpayers. And here's the problem. That's why every independent analysis says you're going to lose. People are going to 12 to 15 million people are going to lose their Medicaid or not get it because these work requirements are impossible. They have incredibly difficult paperwork requirements. They're very difficult to enforce, and they've also created all kinds of paperwork requirements that are going to throw people off Medicaid and make it very difficult for new people to get on. And, you know, this other fabrication is, if we get people to work, we're going to increase employment. You know, we're going to have productivity. Well, again, this is a fabrication. There's a Congressional Budget Office, and as much as Trump wants to attack them, they're bipartisan, independent. They found that Medicaid work requirements result in coverage losses with no change in employment or hours worked. Instead of promoting employment, these requirements often lead to coverage losses due to administrative barriers. Many individuals struggle to navigate these bureaucratic hurdles, leading to accidental loss of coverage due to missed deadlines or incomplete paperwork. A study in Arkansas found that thousands quickly lost Medicaid coverage due to the implementation of work requirements that did nothing to improve employment or hours worked. And who gets harmed? People with disabilities, older adults who may have retired and, really can't get a job, and of course the poorest of the poor, while the wealthy make out like bandits in this bill. And this bill isn't, also attacks food stamps. Certainly people are going to lose their medical insurance, which is, again, going to reverberate on the economy in a negative way because they're not going to get preventive care because they can't afford it, which means they're more likely to get sick or not treat an injury. And that means there's going to be lost work, lost productivity in the economy, lost taxpayer dollars. And where are they going to seek care when it finally gets to the point where they have to? Emergency rooms, the most expensive, least efficient form of care. And you know what? They may find the emergency room in their hospitals are shuttered, particularly if they live in rural areas where, which is the base of the Trump constituency. Because, as I said, you've got to understand all the reverberating effects of this inhumane monstrosity of Trump's folly. What happens when you cut Medicaid? You reduce a critical source of revenue for hospitals, particularly rural hospitals, which are already financially strapped and in danger of either reducing services or shutting down entirely. And so this is going to make it ever more difficult, particularly for people in rural areas, to be able to get care from their hospitals. And this bill does not only focus on Medicaid, food stamps, and big tax deductions. It's got all kinds of other, extraneous but very negative provisions. One small thing, but it's very indicative, that I've highlighted in a previous talk is what I call the assassin's provision.
Yikes.
Yes, that is to make it much easier to buy silencers by taking the tax off of silencers. I call it the assassin's provision because that's all that silencers are used for. Their only purpose is to kill people efficiently, silently, and help you get away with it. They're not used for self-defense. They're not used for hunting. They're not used for collections. They're used for assassinations and murders. So once again, the American people take it in the neck. And who benefits? The gun manufacturers, who are major donors to these same Republicans who are passing this bill. Now, one reason why Elon Musk, and this is the only thing I agree with him about, called this bill a disgusting abomination, aside from the devastating structural effects on the deficit, was that it eliminates our initiatives for alternative energy, including electric vehicles. We talked about this before. Say that several times.
Electric vehicles,
yes. Yeah. We are facing an enormous crisis of climate change. We're all preoccupied with Iran. On a scale of 1 to 10, climate change is 9.9 and Iran maybe 2. And yet the focus is just the opposite. And Trump is doing everything in his power through this bill to reverse all our efforts to combat catastrophic climate change. And I refer you again to the 2009 businessman's letter to Barack Obama, which said, unless we take immediate, strong action on climate change, the results will be devastating for humanity and our planet, signed by Donald Trump Sr., Jr., Eric Trump, and Ivanka Trump. They know. This is how cynical this is. They know the catastrophic effects of climate change, but for pure political cynicism to get their donations from the big oil companies. They have made believe that it's not a real threat. I could go on and on. There is this a 940-page bill.
Have you read it?
No. I've read parts of it, and I've read many descriptions of it. I'm sure, I'm missing some, but I think this gives you some idea of what's going on. Who knows what will happen in the House? But remember what I've always predicted, right, Sam? That Republicans will huff, and they will puff, and they will say we're concerned, but in the end, what will they do?
Well, 3 Republicans didn't vote for it. Had to go to a tie
just
break.
Enough to make sure it passes. That's the same thing for the Hegseth nomination. They're very clever. Oh, we're not monolithic. We have discussions and debates, but it's always just enough votes to make sure that it passes. And they gave Lisa Murkowski, who could have been the 4th fatal vote, all kinds of special promises and special perks for Alaska to undermine principle again and make sure that she votes for the bill. And, everyone is saying, there are all these holdouts in the House, right? And if you believe that, I've got a big bridge to sell you in my hometown of Brooklyn. They're going to cave. I predict it may not be the exact same bill, but we're going to get a very close facsimile because they're all going to cave. And as I said, I'm totally disgusted with the mainstream media, not just because, they're always covering Trump, catering to Trump, using Trump's term, normalizing him. So we saw in Italy and Germany prior to the dictatorships there, the capitulation of the press, and we're seeing it here in the U.S. But even worse, they're saying, these Republicans are doing these things because they're so afraid of Trump. That's missing the forest for the trees. You may be even missing the trees. You're snuffling down in the leaves with that kind of explanation. The true explanation is they agree with Trump. It's not like, we think what Trump is doing is bad, but we can't go against him because we're afraid. No. The Republican Party is the MAGA party. There is no daylight between Trump and the vast majority of Republicans in the House, in the Senate, in the governorships, in state legislatures and city councils all over America. It's all here in my book, Conservative at the Core, A New History of American Conservatism, available for pre-order on Amazon or University of Notre Dame Press website, in which it points out that Trump is not a maverick, that he's not hijacked conservatism, but that he is the logical heir and extension of conservatism, which is exactly where the whole Republican Party has gone. So it's just way too superficial. And again, playing right into the hands to say, they understand how bad the things Trump is doing, but they're going along because they're afraid. No, they're going along because there is no daylight, for the most part, between the vast majority of Republicans and Donald Trump. These so-called mainstream Republicans, you can name them on the fingers of one hand in the Senate and the House. Interestingly, your brilliant mom, Karen Strickler, pointed this out to me. On the same day they passed this bill, they shuttered USAID, the aid agency, and shoved it into the Department of State, while they're making every effort to dismantle aid, to gut the agency. Finally, George W. Bush spoke out against this for good reason. He started the HIV assistance program, which is credited with saving, since he started it in the early 21st century, 25 million lives. And I don't know if it's going to survive or not. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But if it does, it's likely to be greatly curtailed, as are other critical, life-saving aid initiatives that save people's lives, make their lives better, and greatly restores the status and standing of the United States in these countries. And if we pull out, Sam, who pulls in? I know you can answer this question.
The Gabon and Senegal.
Pretty much. China and Russia, of course. And, Trump said, when I'm president, the world is going to respect us. They're going to honor us. Well, a recent poll showed that we've fallen behind China. We've fallen behind China in polls of nations and which nations they hold in esteem. You don't just develop power by bombs and ships and tanks and rockets. Soft power, your standing around the world, your credibility around the world is of critical import. And I don't want to be all negative. There's a very positive thing that happened today, and that is a federal judge in a very lengthy, very well-reasoned opinion said RFK Jr.'s firings, which dismantle critical components of our healthcare system, are illegal. They go against Congress, and you can't arbitrarily, in a different branch of the government, undermine programs that Congress has established. Flatly illegal. Not only is what RFK Jr. doing illegal, it's totally incompetent. The firings were so incompetent that they tried to get back 20% of those they fired because they realized it was a big mistake. This is the same guy who put out a report relying, at least in part, on studies that didn't exist. And they called it a formatting error. That's not a formatting error. Yeah. Formatting error is where you decide where you want to place headings for sections of a report. It's not citing non-existent reports. If one of my freshman students did that, they'd get an F. We're not talking about a freshman student. We're talking about the chief health officer of the United States. And don't get me started on what he's done to undermine confidence in vaccines, which have also saved tens of millions of lives over the last many decades. It's just an absolute disaster. And even when he tries to restore studies, the authors of the studies have said they've been misinterpreted, they've been misunderstood. He's driving an agenda through quack science. So very positively, a federal judge said, no, you cannot arbitrarily undermine what Congress has wrought.
Now, interestingly, back to the bill.
The inhumane monstrosity, Trump's folly.
None of those don't really roll off the tongue. I've heard a lot of people saying that this whole Tillis rift with Trump and him voting no may have opened up the Senate for the Dems in the midterms. Do you think that's actually a possibility now?
Yes.
Before this, they were saying, it was virtually impossible for Dems to take control of the Senate. The House was certainly up for grabs. But now they're saying maybe even the Senate, now that Tillis is gone, a Dem might win that North Carolina seat.
I think, you saw the numbers. 26% underwater. Definitely the Dems could win North Carolina. They won virtually every state election, including governor.
Right.
Even though Trump won the state, at least supposedly. Pennsylvania, I think, is now up for grabs. Maine is now up for grabs. I don't believe it, but people are even talking about Texas being up for grabs. Yeah. I think what Trump has done is, look, I've got the power now. I don't care what might happen a year or two from now. It's the Leo DeRocher philosophy.
Oh,
you know
of
who
course.
Leo DeRocher was?
Of course I do.
You do?
No.
No. He was a famous baseball manager and, very irascible kind of guy, a big playboy, womanizer. And he was once, going all out in a game, burning his pitchers, burning his bench. And one of the announcers said, why are you doing this? What about tomorrow? And DeRocher said, tomorrow it might rain.
Right.
So we're not going to worry about tomorrow. We have the power now. We're going to do everything we can now. And who knows where the rain may fall in the future.
Yeah, I think you're right. The people want to know what you're drinking tonight, Dad. I got my dad onto
You did.
Topo Chico. He's obsessed with it.
I love it. Yeah.
Trying to get him off those diet sodas.
They're trying to get me off diet sodas. They don't want me to smoke cigars. I won't be able to have any fun anymore.
I know. Jeez. Anyways, you like it.
I like it a lot.
Do you want to talk a little bit about this alligator prison that they visited today in the Everglades?
Yeah. You know, who are they imprisoning? People with no criminal convictions or, broken taillights or illegal left turns.
Right. They're claiming that they're going to throw these highly violent criminals that are also undocumented immigrants in there. But like since October of last year, 93% of people processed by ICE have been charged with no violent crime. So
no violent
just
crime.
Statistically,
Yeah.
non-violent.
Where are they going to find these violent people?
Are going to end up in this horrific Everglades prison.
Yeah. Are they going to find them, working in businesses or on farms or in courthouses or in churches? Come on.
And let's say you really do buy into the whole right-wing anti-immigrant thing, right? You really do believe that they are hurting this country. You want them out. Isn't there still a moral and immoral way to go about this? And isn't this their whole structure of what they're doing, especially this new Florida prison? Isn't this about as immoral as you could possibly imagine?
Absolutely. Just because you're a criminal doesn't mean you get to be treated in an inhumane way. In fact, it's right there in our Constitution, Sam. Did you know that?
I mean,
right there in the Bill of Rights, it prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Yes, you can punish people, but you can't do things like whip them or put them in, horrific kinds of conditions. You can incarcerate them, but you cannot have cruel and unusual punishment. That's not only a basic humane principle, it's right there in our Bill of Rights. It's constitutional, it's required, and the Bill of Rights covers everyone, Sam. Doesn't just cover American citizens. You can't detain undocumented immigrants and whip them and torture them or put them in stocks or pillories, and I would say certainly not send them to that hellhole in El Salvador, which if that was in the United States would be immediately found to violate the cruel and unusual provision of the Bill of Rights. And it looks like this, what do they call it? The alligator Alcatraz is just another example of cruel and unusual punishment. But I got to tell you, this is not accidental. This is planned, purposeful. They want to be as cruel as possible.
What happened to good Christian values of morality?
I have a whole chapter on that in my book.
It's again, if you really believe that immigrants are this great danger to the country,
Right.
You want them out. And if you're a good Christian man or woman, you should want to do it as morally as possible, because that's what Christianity and that's what Jesus teaches.
And that's what Judaism teaches. Every great religion teaches basic morality. Never mind that it's written right there in the Constitution of the United States. But they want to be cruel because they want to discourage anyone from coming in to the United States. And they want to instill maximum terror and maximum fear in those who are here that are undocumented, in the hope that somehow they will, what do they call it, self-deport and voluntarily leave the country. And let me make one more quick point. And they're no less cruel when it comes to firing people willy-nilly without cause from the government, firing people who may be supporting kids with disabilities, who need the paycheck for their rent or their food. They don't care. In fact, they said one of the big problems with this country is too much empathy, too much caring for one another.
Yeah, I remember in the New Testament, Jesus saying that.
Yeah, right.
The problem with the world is too much empathy. I think that's
we
a
should never
direct quote.
care for our neighbor.
That's a direct quote from Jesus.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about the Supreme Court decision last week? I think it happened on Friday, right?
I think I did talk about it.
You did a short on it.
I'll do it. I did a short. The Constitution is crystal clear. Any child born in the United States is a U.S. citizen, except from an invading army or diplomats. Has nothing to do with your status, legal or illegal, as an immigrant. Trump says it's only for the babies of slaves. Well, the Supreme Court decision in 1898 by a very conservative Supreme Court, same Supreme Court that sanctioned separate but equal for the races, granted citizenship not to the child of a slave, but to a child of a Chinese immigrant who was here illegally because we were barring Asian immigrants. Moreover, at the very time that they passed the amendment, thousands of people who are here illegally got citizenship. I'm talking about those slaves who were brought over after we repealed the slave trade in 1808. Thousands were smuggled here. They were all illegal, and all of their children got citizenship.
Right, but this case was specifically about injunctions, and it's a little even confusing to me because I remember when there was an injunction against mifepristone, the abortion drug. A lot of people on the left were really upset. Now that Trump's in office and there's nationwide injunctions against.
Right.
So can you break that down a little bit?
I went a bit of a riff on birthright citizenship because I just wanted to make clear how important this is. And if this goes through, you're going to have to check the parentage of every child born in this country to make sure they weren't born of undocumented immigrants. Show us your papers.
It's not even going to be possible. They're just going to.
Of course not.
It's not even going to be possible. They're just going to pick and choose who they want to throw out.
Exactly. So what they did say was they didn't deal with the substance of the issue, but they did say that a lower court can only grant relief to the plaintiffs. It cannot go beyond the class of plaintiffs, those who brought the suit, to file a nationwide injunction. Therefore, the nationwide injunctions that have been filed by lower courts against this blatantly unconstitutional order are null and void. And within 30 days, Trump can begin to enforce it, except for those plaintiffs and those, I think it's just one or two states, where they have an injunction. So while it's technical, it opens the door for Trump to enforce this, and it's going to be, as you say, pick and choose. It's not going to be consistently enforced. We're going to have a patchwork of citizenship, a patchwork of stateless people in this country. It's just an ultimate nightmare. But Amy Coney Barrett, who wrote the opinion, did leave, again, I'm not a lawyer, but this is my understanding, did leave a loophole. That is, you conceivably could bring a class action suit.
Right.
That would include persons from every state in the country, like class action suits nationwide are. And if you got relief for a class action, then conceivably that could legally establish a nationwide injunction. Not certain, because it'll go back to the Supreme Court again, and who knows where it's going to stand. But, Supreme Court, for things Trump wants, has put it all on the rocket docket. And as we know, otherwise, like they did with the Trump immunity claim, they delayed it for many, many months until it was too late to try Trump. They need to get on the substance of this case very quickly, but they're not going to.
Right. I mean, we could find ourselves in a situation where in Arizona, someone could be not a citizen who was born there in the next 6 months, and then in California, you could be a citizen.
And what happens if they move from Arizona to California?
It doesn't make any sense. Essentially, it seems to me like they're saying, yeah, you can start enacting a potentially unconstitutional law, and then we'll deal with it eventually. And it's like, but there's going to be so many repercussions in that period of time. It doesn't make any sense to
Here's
me.
what they should have said. Yes, you cannot, without changing the substance of the ruling, yes, you cannot grant nationwide injunctions when the plaintiffs are limited, but because there is a serious constitutional question at issue here, we are going to pause the executive order until we rule on the merits. That's what they should have said.
Right.
And it wouldn't have changed anything except it wouldn't create this nightmare situation that we're facing.
Right. Strange. All right. Anything else before we're already pretty.
Oh,
over.
I've got plenty of things, but we want to get our brilliant audience to
scooch.
Ask questions.
All right, before we get to that, some housekeeping.
Oh, housekeeping.
If you're not following us, you can follow us at the handles below. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Turn that notification bell so you know we're live. We have almost 1,700 people watching, but only 600 likes. Please like the stream. It helps a lot. Check out our new merch store. The link to that will be pinned in the description of this video. We're also having a competition to win his book for the best Democratic messaging. Make sure you get your entry in now. Donations and members get priority on questions. All right. This is from Michalooper.
That's a new one, I think. I don't.
No.
All right. I'm old. I don't remember.
Professor, what are the chances of the House being able to derail the big bad bill, or at least get some of its more heinous elements stripped away? How much leeway do House members have to make changes to this piece of legislation, which originated in the House?
They've got plenty of leeway to change it. So, but then it would go back to the Senate. And who knows, what ultimately both houses have to agree on a common version of the bill. Am I optimistic?
No.
I think the House may make some small changes just to get members on board, but I don't believe they're going to be fundamental changes to the bill. They may make it a little more palatable for PR purposes and to get everyone on board, but I do believe the fundamentals of the bill will stay in place.
Is there any realistic recourse for those of us who are captive in states like Texas, where both Senators Corn and Cruz are, quote, long gone, and Republican members in the House outnumbered Democrats 2-1? Telling Texans to call our congressional representatives is useless. Basically just a cruel reminder that democracy and the republic are a farce, and the citizenry is a cast of AI-generated extras.
Wow. So you and I are AI-generated extras? Or are we part of the Matrix?
I don't think so. I think you're real.
Yeah, I felt that.
Right.
Yeah, it's very tough for people in states like Texas. The only thing I can recommend to you is supposedly, and I'm skeptical, we may have a competitive Senate race for Cornyn's seat since he's leaving. And, an open seat does create possibilities. But I've been hearing for 20 years that Texas is going to go purple. And it's barely faded in its deep shade of red. So what you can do, of course, is vote. Organize for the vote. Get out the vote. Texas is one of the worst states, if not the worst state in the union for voting turnout. It's right at the bottom. And if somehow you could get more progressive Texans to turn out, that could make the difference. That's the only slim glimmer of hope I can give you.
If this bill eventually passes, can anything be done in the future if the Dems win in 26 to curtail the damage, since a lot won't change for a while?
The only way you possibly could derail this is through the courts, but, don't count on the Supreme Court cooperating. Winning the House alone won't do you any good. You would have to ameliorate it through both houses and the presidency. And that's going to be, even if the Democrats achieve that in 2028, it can be very difficult to repeal any bill.
In the early 1900s, politicians signed legislation that breaks up monopolies and billionaires. What happened to that legislation?
Things like the Federal Trade Commission, the Interstate Commerce Commission, which is actually a little earlier, Clayton Antitrust Act, they're all still in the books, but they're dead letters. They really weren't even all that effective back then, and they're certainly not effective now. It's so difficult to bring an antitrust suit. These huge corporations have, any number of incredibly high-priced lawyers who usually can out-lawyer the much more limited salaried officers of the federal government, and they've learned to set up their enterprises in a way that get around the antitrust laws.
This is from our good friend Philip H. They say the largest part of these cuts take place in 2028 and 2029. Why does the same playbook keep working? Republicans orchestrate a disaster to happen under Dems.
That's, brilliant politics on their part. Put it off and then blame it on the Democrats. We've seen this time and time again. We saw it in the recession of 2008, largely produced by Trump's failure to deal effectively with COVID. That's 2020, largely due to Trump's failure to deal effectively with COVID, and then the recession of 2008, largely due to the ineffectual regulation of the Republican administrations and their unwillingness to deal with all the fraud and deception going on among their friends in business and finance. And, of course, it's left for the Democrats to clean it up. And as you heard Donald Trump, then he just blames everything on the Democrats. That's one thing Republicans are really, really good at. A number of things: delay, obstruction, and deflection of blame.
Right. This is a $10 donation from Limited Light. They say, I estimate the Trump base to be only 15 to 25%, but I've heard some pundits claim it's 33 or 35%. What percentage of the population do you think the base is, and why?
It's not 15 to 25%. It's certainly more like 33 to 35%, because you never, no matter what the situation is, see Trump's approval ratings go below that. And, I've talked about this before. America has always been polarized into two parts. One part is tolerant, inclusive, embraces diversity, whether it be racially, gender, sexual preference. The other side is homogeneous, unified, not tolerant of diversity, believes that the true American heritage is the pioneer generation, white, European, Christian-based civilization. And it's not surprising that Trump should have a substantial base, because he operates on that side of the polarity that has always been part of American life.
$5 donation from Ben Weinberg. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Do you think Trump's birthright citizenship executive order will go into effect in 30 days? We were talking about sort of the ramifications of it. You think it's actually going to go into effect within the next month?
Looks like it.
It's going to be complete chaos.
Complete chaos. And this is exactly what authoritarians do. Show us your papers. Prove you're pure. Prove your heritage. Can you imagine in America? And this is not only supposedly the party of fiscal responsibility. We've seen what a laugh that was. They're also supposed to be the party of limited government, right, Sam? Yeah, this is real example of limited government.
Let's see here. Professor, is the big, beautiful bill the worst piece of legislation in modern American history? If not, what piece of modern legislation do you believe is worse?
Oh, I think it's not close.
What?
It's clearly the worst piece of legislation.
In modern history?
In modern history. I think you got to go back to the Fugitive Slave Act, perhaps.
Oh, my God.
To find something worse. Maybe, and I don't think it's as bad, the Taft-Hartley Act that kind of scuttled labor rights after Republicans took over the Congress in 1946. But in terms of the breadth of its negative implications for our country and our people, this is the worst
Wow. Ben England says, has the Supreme Court ever been as pro-unitary executive as it is now?
Never. Certainly not in the modern
Again,
history.
I don't get it. I thought conservatives were supposed to be, not about kings and not about big government, but for some reason, this conservative Supreme Court seems to want to give so much power to one man.
Right.
In the government.
As we said, and this is, it's all there in my book. All of these principles that Republicans and conservatives claim to stand for, right? Strict construction of the Constitution, law and order, personal responsibility, limited government, fiscal responsibility, free enterprise. They're all just to suck you in. They're all for public consumption. And, of course, what they're really all about is protecting and advancing their rich friends. I call it protecting private, not free enterprise, as we've seen with tariffs, which blows the biggest hole you can in free enterprise, and of course advancing their own version, limited, distorted version of Judeo-Christian values.
I mean, distorted is a kind word.
It's a very kind word, but I'm a kind guy. I'm not like Lyndon Johnson, giving all this raw stuff.
Right. To what extent did U.S. foreign policy in the 1980s contribute to the rise and longevity of Saddam Hussein's regime?
I'm not an expert in that, but certainly, we did tilt towards Saddam Hussein in the 1980s. And then in 1991, during the Gulf War, when we could have, we refrained from going to Baghdad and toppling his regime because we understood that the reason we supported him was that he was at least putting a lid on all of the religious and ethnic conflicts within Iraq. You get rid of Saddam, as we've seen, and those conflicts come to the fore.
This is from a question from our good friend Tashdid Khan. They say, Professor Lichtman, South Africa's post-apartheid truth and reconciliation model and broader reparations frameworks offer a viable foundation for resolving historic injustices and achieving lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. What political conditions would need to exist for such a model to take root, and how does continued U.S. military aid to both Israel and Egypt undermine these prospects?
Wow. I can't.
That was quite a question.
Yeah, I can't tackle that whole question, but I'll tackle the essence of it. Absolutely, you need a truth and reconciliation process. You cannot, as Eisenhower pointed out way back in the 50s, resolve the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians by violence and by military means. Both sides have grievances. Both sides believe their grievances are totally legitimate. So the only way you're going to achieve any kind of reconciliation is to have this kind of open, truthful, independent process that respects both sides, that understands both sides, has real grievances, and, recognizes legitimacy of the grievances and complaints on both sides, and somehow, in some way, and it would take, genius of a mediator to come to some kind of middle ground between them. But that's the only way it's going to happen. Our audience member is very, very smart. And we're not going to stop our aid to Egypt and Israel. Those are our, big, essential nations in the Middle East.
What are the pros and cons of universal basic income?
I assume they mean guaranteed annual income is what I would call it. The pros are that you put a floor under people's income and you keep people from sinking into abject poverty, which leads to all kinds of social problems, leads to criminality, reverberates across the generations. The arguments against it are, again, you're going to put a big hole in the deficit, substantially increase spending, and create dependency where people would rather take the basic income than work.
Do you agree with those who are condemning Senator Kristen Gillibrand's disgusting comments on Zohran Mamdani, including that he supports, quote, global jihad?
I've talked about this last week.
Oh, you did?
Yes. Remember I said the Democrats are at it again. You know, oh, my God, we're so scared. You know, this guy is radical. You know, if we embrace him, we might be attacked by the Republicans. You don't have to accept all of his policy ideas. You don't have to condemn them either. What you need to do, though, which you're not doing, and you're just again playing not to lose, which is sure to lose, is understand his appeal. Why was he able to do what Senator Gillibrand or Senator Schumer can't do? Inspire thousands of volunteers, including young people who are moving away from the Democratic Party, to come out and work for him. Embrace that, understand it, and figure it out and use it. Figure out how he was able to inspire young people. Figure out the ways in which he was using modern sources of digital media to organize and develop his campaign. How much time do we have?
4 minutes.
All right. 3 more questions.
3 more questions. And one of them is from our good friend Vacuum Tubes for Hi-Fi.
Great friend.
Hungry populations become angry quickly. Increasingly, folks are having to borrow money just for groceries. Will we reach a point where French-style revolution will break out?
Yeah. One of my favorite sayings from the French Revolution style, not the 18th century, but the 20th century, was Danny the Red, who said, be practical, do the impossible. That was sort of the motivating force behind, the modern French Revolution. And I don't think we're going to go back to the 18th century version, but we may well see forms of revolution breaking out depending on how bad things get in this country. Remember what happened in the 60s? Took everyone by surprise. Cities all over the country in flames, starting in a place nobody expected. Where was that, Sam? Los Angeles, the Watts riots of 1965, and then exploding again after the assassination of Martin Luther King on my birthday, April 4th, in this case, 1968. I wasn't born in 1968, but I was born on April 4th.
This is our final question, or we have 2 more?
What time is it?
58.
Are you going to do a post show?
The good news is the post show is back, baby.
All right. I think this should be the final
last question
then.
$5 donation from Spencer Arno. They say, regarding the Newsome versus Trump case, given the protests have died down and the troops have left their posts, do you think SCOTUS will rule or dismiss it?
I'm not sure I understand. Rule or what?
Will rule on the Trump versus Newsome case.
I think they'll probably. Yeah, I got it now. I think they'll probably dismiss it. That's Robert's MO. If I don't have to decide a contested case that doesn't really do the court any good, and it's now, if it's mooted because the troops are gone and the demonstrations are over, then they can say we don't need to rule on this matter.
Okay, with that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for this evening. A couple shout-outs to donations who didn't make it on air. Anna, Christopher Probst, Wendy Y, Veda Ra, Sandwich, Fried Jemmy. Thank you all so much. We much appreciate it. The Lichtman Live post show comes up right after this on my channel, so stick around for that.
And become members. It costs less than a milkshake.
Correct. Dad, what are your final words to the people tonight on a pretty historic night? This big Megabill has passed the Senate, still needs to pass the House, and it still needs the president's signature. But it's a pretty big milestone.
It's a huge milestone in the history of our country, in not just an immediate way, but in a fundamental, structural way. And it really denies so much the progress that is made in this country since the early 20th century. But we're resilient. We've come back from worse. I don't believe it's going to happen, but there is still at least an outside chance that this bill will get churned up in the conflict between the U.S. Senate and the House.
All right. Thank you, Dad. See you all in the post show.
Good night.